Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? I'd like to ask you all to take a trip down memory lane with me. I want you to think back as far as you can go to your earliest memories, good or bad. See if you can recall how old you were, where you were at, time of day, sights, sounds. For me, I recall a time I can go back to when I was 4 years old. Living in Lakeside, California with my mom and my dad. We had a single-story house, small single-story house. It's backed up against this hillside. I remember a big block retaining wall in the backyard. I remember the green shag carpet throughout the house. And I remember getting this as a battery-operated car that I don't know if it was for Christmas or birthday or what it was, but I remember cruising that around the house. Then I have another memory about that same time that I recall much more vividly. I was walking into Sears there in El Cajon Parkway Plaza. For those of you who've been to San Diego, you drive right by it. It's right off the 8 there on the right-hand side. So I'm walking into Sears with my mom. It's mid-morning, sunny day. I'm on her right side. She's holding my left hand. We're walking in. And I'm looking at the doors of Sears as we're walking in. And out comes this elderly lady with a probably 3-year-old little girl, blonde hair. And I recall she was throwing a temper tantrum. About the same time, I looked to the right, and through the parking lot is driving a full-size white van, windowless van, like a service van. So as we're walking through, I look back. At that same time, that child broke free from her grandmother and ran right out front of that van. Now, I'll share you the details of that day, but for me, I recall it to this day. I recall the sight, the sound. I recall my mother grabbing me, covering me up, trying to hide my eyes. It still gets me emotional. But the thing I remember the most was that blood-curdling scream from that grandmother. I'll never forget it. In fact, to this day, when I drive by that Sears, I still recall that incident. So why do I share these two memories with you? To illustrate that I recall in far greater detail the traumatic event than I do the non-traumatic event. In fact, science shows us that we process traumatic events differently by way of the brain's limbic system, which is responsible for sensation and emotions. So think about this in your average civilian. They may experience a handful of these incidents over a lifetime, maybe a few. And then you look at first responders and what the men and women of our industry see day in and day out. What kind of cumulative effect does that have? I've got an audio clip of a call here that happened in the Valley a few years back. I want you to just listen and process it.
Yes, ma'am. I got a baby that drowned in the pool.
All right. Is the baby breathing?
No, she's not.
She's not breathing?
No.
Echo response. Let me get this right on over to the dispatcher.
Excuse me?
Do you have the baby there with you?
Turn it over, please. Turn it over.
Okay, sir.
Job.
Yes, sir. I'm going to help you with this right now. I want you to...
Listen to her now.
Okay, are you right there with me?
Yes, ma'am.
You have the baby right there?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I want you to lay the baby flat on her back.
Lay her flat on her back.
I want you to check her mouth.
Lay her flat.
Okay?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to tell you how to do mouth to mouth. I want you to tell me. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Point her head.
Oh, great. Come on, Cal.
Tilt her head back, cover her mouth and nose with your mouth. Blow 2 soft puffs of air into her lungs like a small balloon.
There.
Okay? Watch for the chest to rise.
Oh, Cal.
You see her air going in and out?
Yeah. I hear water in her lungs.
Okay.
Oh, hit her up. Do what she's telling you. Gotta come on.
All right, are you listening?
Yes.
Okay, I want you to do some CPR compressions. 2 fingers, the center of her chest between the nipples.
Yeah.
Push down about 1 inch just with your fingers touching the chest.
Here.
5 rapid pushes.
Come on, Kel. Come on, Kel. Come on, baby.
We've got people coming. Okay, we've got people coming to you. Let's keep this up. With your hand under her neck and shoulders, tilt her head back slightly. Put your mouth over her nose and mouth. 1 soft puff.
Come on, baby. She's waiting.
Pump the chest 5 more times. Make sure your fingers are between the nipples.
Why are you watching her?
That we're going to repeat this cycle. Are you listening? Are you with me? 1 pump, 5 pumps.
Help me.
1 puff, 5 pumps. We're going to keep doing this.
Come on, Kel. Please, Kel. Come on, baby.
Okay.
Come on, baby.
She needs more air.
5 pumps and give her air.
1 puff, 5 pumps.
Hold her nose when you're doing that.
Mouth and nose.
You do the pump and I'm going to give her the air.
How old is she?
She's 2 years old.
Pump her 5 times and I'll hold her nose and give
Air
her
doesn't come
air.
out of her lungs. Help us.
We're going to keep doing this. 1 puff, 5 pumps.
5 pumps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, where are you at? Where are you at so we can find you there? I've got units on scene.
2, 3, 4. We're in the back of the house.
Back of the house.
So how do you feel after listening to that? You know, at the end of the day today, you probably won't remember most of what we talked about. But I bet you remember the sound, the tone, the desperation in those grandparents' voice as they cried for help. Now, as far as our first responders go, how will they remember it? They run these type of calls on a regular basis. In fact, last year alone in Pinellas and Maricopa counties, we had 161 water-related incidents, and 52 of those were fatalities. Now you add on top of that your pediatric codes, your traumas, shootings, sleep deprivation, and the daily stressors of life. More than likely, these folks were not resilient. More than likely, they were not acclimated. More than likely, they did not have access to a peer support team. More than likely, they do not have access to a 24/7, 365-day-a-year EMS provider-specific counseling service. And more than likely, when they go home, they do not have a support mechanism in place that fully understands what we do. So, you know, not all are affected by this. You know, out of all the people on that scene, there might be one individual that has a 2-year-old, same color hair. How are they going to respond the rest of the shift? What if you get one of these type of incidents, again, that same day, weeks to come? How will they respond? What are we doing as peers, organizations, and industry to address this crisis? In January 2018, Peoria Fire-Medical Department, Labor and Management got together and formed a committee comprised of myself, my assistant Nicole, Labor Representative Captain Ben Burns, who is now Peer Support Team Lead, and 3 other members of the fire department. Our main mission was to address depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, and prevent suicide. We are committed. We know there's a huge stigma that's wrapped around this, and people do not want to seek help. But we are committed through education, advocacy, and support to our members to preventing the loss of one of our own. So we formed our program known as In It Together, and I'll walk you through that now. So we broke this up in a 3-phase approach. Mainly wanted to make it manageable, wanted to make it measurable. So we'll go through these 3 phases. Phase 1, I'll skim over this and we'll get into greater detail as we go throughout. And I'll ask you all to just take your notes, and this afternoon after our presentation, we're going to answer all questions for the sake of time. So we took a three-phase approach. Phase one would be the development of our peer support team. Then we go to phase two, which is vetting internal and external resources for both our peer support team and our members. Then we go into phase three, which is an ongoing phase, which is our resiliency training for not only our members, but our peers, and also we're going to have a family component as part of that. So I know that you look at that screen up there and it's a static screen, but this is a dynamic process. Like any program, if you want it to be successful, it requires you to have hands-on. Okay, this is not something you build and you walk away from. This is something that you need constant attention to. You need a champion in your organization that can head this up and run with it. So we have the three phases. Now, phase one, which is the foundation of our peer support program, and I think the most important part of it is our peer support team. So, how did we get our peer support team members? Well, we sent out, there's three parts to that. We sent out a letter of introduction, a survey, and then we had training. So, this is the first touch point to our organization here. So the committee got together and we wanted to send this out to the department, basically saying what we were doing, why we were doing it, and the mission behind it. So we'll dive a little deeper into that letter. So, letter goes out. We wanted members to submit 3 names of trusted peers that they can contact in a time of crisis. Who do they trust? Our goal when putting this program together was to get about 10% of our membership. And how did we arrive at that? Well, we did extensive research, talked to several organizations, especially Mesa Fire. I got to give credit to them. They've been doing this for a while. And they said, 10% is a pretty good sample of your workforce. So we said, okay, well, why reinvent the wheel? Let's start with 10%, which means 16 to 18 members for our organization. And then the purpose on this was to train selected members in peer support and crisis intervention. And why? So we could provide our members with access-trained peer support members who are confidential and they understand the unique challenges that we face day in and day out. After all, they're out in the trenches with each other. And then finally, connection for our folks to connect a member in need to trusted resources. And again, they're not counselors, but they're trained to connect and they're trained to be there in time of need. So, we sent that letter out. About a week later, the union sent out a survey, their SurveyMonkey, basically asking the membership to list 3 names of trusted peers that you would call in a time of need or a time of crisis. We had an overwhelming response from the membership. Sent the surveys back, the union tallied everything up, and here you go with the chosen members for the peer support team. And once these members were chosen, they were contacted, and every single one of them said, absolutely, yes, we want to be a part of this. And so, if you look at this up here, you can see the diversity in our peer support team. This is important. Again, this is chosen by our membership, not management. That's important. The membership needs to choose who they want their peer support team to be because these folks are out there doing it with them every day. They understand the challenges. They trust each other. So if you look at this, we have a very diverse group. We have members from all ranks, ethnicities, male, female, experience levels. This represents a perfect cross-section of our organization. And what you can't see here is some of the personalities. Now, there's a few of them in there, I won't point them out, but are kind of gruff, a little rough around the edges. And it's interesting because now, after going through this training and being a part of this, they're some of our biggest advocates. In fact, talking about breaking down the stigma, not only are they our biggest advocates, but now you have 17 members here that are advocates for breaking down the stigma. So it's a great starting point for your organization. So, phase 1 peer support training. So the committee sat down, we said, what are our needs? We recognized at the time we are not experts in this space, even though we did extensive research, talked to a lot of different organizations. So we sat down in the committee, we outlined what our needs were. We knew we needed some assistance in developing and training our peer support team. We knew we needed on-site critical incident stress intervention. We need somebody that we can call right now, and they're going to respond out there. We wanted master-level clinicians, psychologists. Again, we wanted to be able to get in the same day. Oftentimes, somebody, whether it's going through the EAP process, they reach out, oh, we'll get you an appointment next week or the week after. When someone's in crisis, the last thing you want to do is put them on hold. You want to deal with it right now. So, we wanted 24/7 immediate phone access. And through our research, one particular name kept coming up, one particular company. And that's Tom McSherry and his company, Crisis Preparation and Recovery. So we sat down with Tom, went through our needs and wants, and he was able to fill all of these. And even some bonuses on top of that is their group has access to 7 clinics, medication administration, and the icing on the cake, everything was specific to first responders. He has access to over 200 clinicians, and they all specialize in what we do. And he provided our training for our peer support team. So, now that we have the peer support team trained, how do we engage them? So, 3 different ways. By individual reach out. That's when a member in need picks up the phone, calls a peer support team member and says, hey, I'm having some issues. That's one way. Another way is request or referral for welfare checks. That's maybe you have somebody on your truck that you notice isn't acting right, they seem a little off lately, and you're concerned about it, but you don't feel comfortable approaching them. So you pick up the phone, call peer support to do a welfare check. So they'll make access. Thirdly, response to high stress incidents, which we'll go into greater detail on this. So you can see on the screen here, this is the nature codes by Phoenix Alarm. There's hundreds of them up here. So we sat down as a committee, we said, what are our top high stress incidents that we need to address right off the bat? So based on our experience and research, we came up with 6. We came up with child or infant codes, drownings, gunshot wounds, hangings, mass casualty incidents, and maydays. So that's a starting point. Now, at any given point, we can add to these, we could take away from these, but we needed some place to start to identify which incidents are high stress. So, now, with the high stress pages, how do we activate this? So we sat down with Phoenix Alarm, and we basically told them what we wanted to do, and we set up all of our peer support team members to receive a page whenever a high stress incident comes out in Peoria or a Peoria unit is responding within the city of Peoria. So the entire peer support team will get a page. It looks like this to the right. We've blacked some things out for obvious reasons, but you can see we have the nature code, the time, we have the incident number, address, and the units that are responding. So, how do we avoid all peer support team members making phone calls to do follow-ups? Okay, so what we did was at the end of each month, my assistant and I, we sit down and we put the schedule together. Now this does 2 things. One, all the folks that you see on the schedule are on call, they're on shift, they're working that day. This makes it to where there's quick access if a member needs them, and also it prevents overtime. So, if you see on the top, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's the top person is bold on the calendar. That's our primary contact for that day. The person below is a secondary contact for that day. So, high stress incident page, they receive a high stress incident page. As soon as the call is done, then the primary peer support team member will make contact with that crew that ran that incident. Basically do a welfare check. How you guys doing? Do you need anything? That was a rough call. And at that point in time, they'll remind them, hey, make sure you fill out your traumatic event exposure form, which we'll talk about that in a moment. So remind you of that, and then they say, hey, well, if you don't mind, we're going to do a follow-up with you here in a few days to make sure that everything's going okay. So, phase 2, we go to resources. Now we have our peer support team. If a member needs help, how do we access it? So we have a lot of resource options there. We have our insurance through our EAP. We have counselors, rehab facilities. You can seek treatment through the emergency room. Then we have House Bill 2502, which we'll talk more in depth about here coming up. So with all these resources, we didn't want to have a member in need try to navigate their way through it and run into roadblocks. We've all heard the horror stories of folks calling EAP, not getting the help they need, not getting in time. So we wanted to take that away from our member. We wanted a single point of contact, and that's where CPR comes in. So we funnel all of our folks to that number. That's their starting point. And during the training, we had them program that number in their phone. And as you can see here, this is our poster. We've branded ourselves in it together. We have our crisis response. This is a Peoria specific number here for 24/7, 365 days a year. EMS provider specific counseling services. So on this poster, we have all our resources. We have our peer support team leads, Ben Burns and Steve Gunn, their contact information there, and a link to our internal website, which is this one here. So we send out this, we put these posters at every station. We put them at resource, admin, and then we put it here on our internal website. So you can see we have our number there for CPR, we have our peer support team, and we have a list of resources, and what you don't see on here is the calendar. That's on there as well with who's on call. And then we have our important resources and links to the right. At the top here we have the Arizona Department of Health Services Resiliency link, which I'm proud to be a part of that work group and putting this together. They're doing some great work at the state. So I encourage you all to copy this link down. Great resource, easy to access. So we mentioned the traumatic event exposure form. Now, what's important about this form is, one, it's familiar to our members, because currently we track all of our exposures, whether it's a toxic exposure, bloodborne pathogens, and we do that through our training system, Target Solutions, which keeps the record indefinitely, which is very important. So we created this form, one, to track our peer support contacts. So traumatic event kicks out, any member can fill this form out. You can put up to 6 members on here. So you cover your engine company and the rescue, or whatever. You've got your employee name, names of the members, the shift, incident number, and then you have some check boxes here. Now these check boxes here directly relate to House Bill 2502. This is what's on that bill right there. So now we're compliant with that bill, which we'll talk more about it. But then we have an other traumatic event box at the bottom. So any incident that a member feels was potentially a traumatic incident, they could check that box. They write a description of it, and they submit the form. Now, that form Once it's submitted, it comes to myself, comes to Ben Burns, peer support team lead and labor representative, and it goes into Target Solutions. Now, to touch on House Bill 2502, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's also known as Officer Craig Tiger Act. He was an officer that took his own life. So they came up with this bill with these different, we've got code on there, we've got crimes against children, in the line of duty rescue. So basically in the event that a member runs on one of these incidents and having problems, they get up to 36 paid visits through their organization with a licensed clinician. So that's very important, and this tracks it, and it's confidential, and it maintains compliance with that. So, another resource that we have is our CISM debriefings. Now, we used to do this several years ago, and we got away from it, and now we're, thanks to our great relationship with our police department, they do this on a regular basis, so they're inviting us to these CISM debriefings. Now, what's good about the CISM debriefings is it gives you different perspectives. Everybody that's involved in that call, from dispatchers to PD to the EMS providers, put you in the same room to work through the incident with a licensed clinician to where you can kind of fill in the gaps. You get different perspectives, put some closure on it, develop some understanding. And what we do, if it's on the days off, we will offer comp time